what that researcher, Evan, I've always loved Evan. I don't always remember his last name.
Dr. Evan Orticio. Oh, he's not a doctor yet. I forgot.
Pending Dr. Evan Orticio.
Mr. Evan Orticio.
He's one of, if not my favorite pending doctor.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's record the intro now.
So what did Milkless? Because I think we start with the name.
Two dads, we love our kids, but then we also need them to know that we're like pretty cool and it's not like a wimpy podcast. So, hey, hey, Milkless.
Hey, welcome. Hey,
Milkless. Call the audience, Milkless. What's up, Milkless? Max coming at you.
What if that's it? That's our first take.
All right, Matt, today, Tuesday, October 22nd, there is a paper that was published 12 days ago in the journal Nature Human Behavior. Pretty interesting piece of research that just came out from a PhD student at UC Berkeley that I think is worth talking about because it's something we haven't talked about yet. And it's going to be about how crucial it is to teach practical fact-checking skills and about misinformation and how maybe we shouldn't just shield our kids from misinformation, but actually lean in to this misinformation.
Ooh, that's topical too. We got how many days till the election, right? Like, yeah, it's good to be thinking about this stuff.
It's a really, really cool study. And I love the way this guy, Evan Orticio, designed it. So
love the work of Evan Orticio. I've always loved Evan Orticio.
Love Evan.
Been a big fan of his for decades.
Yeah. Hope he gets that PhD. Or no, PhD student. Yeah. So I don't think he has it yet. So he's not Dr. Evan just yet.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but he will be someday. We're rooting for you, Evan.
What he did was first they showed all these kids, 122 kids, aged 4 to 7, an ebook, with varying degrees of false and true statements about animals. Like, for example, one was a zebra, and some children were shown just truths, like zebras had black and white stripes. Others were shown falsehoods, showing that the zebras were red and green. So they had to indicate whether the claims were true or false. Okay. So then the second one, it was kind of like a kid version, like to simulate like a search engine results or something. They showed 20 aliens. One of the aliens showed the face and the alien had 3 eyes. The other 19 had sunglasses on. And the question was, do all of these aliens have 3 eyes? And if the kids were shown true things on this same screen, probably 5 minutes before, showed that the zebras are black and white, it was almost unanimous that they just said, yeah, they all have 3 eyes. Because why would there be trickeration here? But the kids who were shown the red and blue zebras had a crazily high, statistically significant incidence rate of fact checking.
Interesting.
So what this research is showing is that if the kids are shielded from all misinformation, they're probably more susceptible to scams or believing deepfakes when they're adults. Whereas if they're shown misinformation and maybe kind of primed to question that, they're more prepared down the line. So,
well, and it's interesting because they're not just shown misinformation, they're shown misinformation on the same platform. Mm-hmm. And I think this has been one of the things that's hard for oldsters like us, and even more so for our parents, is it used to be like, oh, the newspaper got delivered to your house. And maybe, not that there weren't problems with newspapers and problems with only certain stories being told, but, et cetera, et cetera. There used to be gatekeepers, but there was a certain standard expected of newspapers. And now, like on the same computer screen, you see New York Times and Wall Street Journal and some bullshit that somebody's uncle thought up in his garage and some flat earther bullshit. And it's all in the same place. And now there's even like a level of polish to a lot of the bullshit that mimics stuff that, at least in theory, has some level of journalistic integrity and rigor. And just look at Twitter. Like Twitter, it all looks the same, right? Like something from the foremost expert in the field and something from Joe conspiracy theorists. And so there is I wonder if for kids, it's like the kids that saw the thing that had the red and green zebras. It's not just like, oh, there is such thing as misinformation, but, oh, this source this source is actually you suspect. This source is suspect.
Yeah.
So I got to question everything that comes from there.
Yeah, I think also just like, so let's get into some strategies and then some also real world things down the line. But I think also some strategies that are fun and playful are just things like satire, you know, where you have a deadpan delivery of something that is just not true, where it kind of teaches kids to question things. Have you ever like said a joke about like, you know, if they, you know, kids ask like millions and millions of questions, like, you know, when was the last dinosaur alive? And you'd be like, you know, 3 Tuesdays ago. And they'd be like, no.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
like having that where maybe you're kind of keeping them on their toes. Like you're not always giving them a straight answer.
Yeah. I do that all the time. And sometimes I'm like, oh, my daughters are deeply skeptical of the information I give them. But I also have a little bit of a telegraph to it because I don't ever want to like lead them down a bad road. But yeah, one of the first things I do with my daughter is if my daughter would be like, how do you know that? I would be like, well, either me or my brother knows everything. And then if she asked me something I didn't know, I'd be like, well, you know, my brother knows that one.
Yeah.
And it would just drive her up the wall until finally she made me like FaceTime my brother so she could ask us a question at the same time. Yeah. And she always brings that up. She's like, remember that time? I'm like, all right. One is just a playful thing that's fun. But two, as a don't take anybody's word for it. I think there's also probably some deep skills building about trusting yourself and your own perception of things that like goes into having a kid who is not overly credulous or susceptible to misinformation. It's like, do your own gut check and listen to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I think also it's also just priming kids about the outside world. Because here's what I'd love to know, how to balance this. You want people to be generally trusting and not be whatever the opposite of that is. Like, you know, not trusting anyone, you know, fear, everyone's out to get me. With that said, it's embarrassing when, you know, your software company puts out a phishing penetration test where we try to trick our own people. And like, you know, 15% of people fall for it and type in their social security number.
Yeah.
But some of these scams have become so sophisticated. I know a very close family friend who fell victim to a scam, lost $14,000. It is so fucking common. So then what do you say? Like, you know, you don't trust anybody, you know, always you put some guardrails around it. Like once the kids get older, start getting access to an email address, you know, like obviously we need to lay the foundation for young kids, but then down the line, I mean, this is going to be our world. And the reason this PhD candidate did this survey is they're saying that the biggest threat or something down the line is going to be AI and, you know, really understanding what is real. So that's going to be an important thing going forward.
Yeah. Well, and in a lot of ways, they're going to be at a comparative advantage to us because we've had to like retrain our brains that just because you see a realistic picture of something doesn't mean that it happened. Mm-hmm. They're going to grow up with like, just because you see a video and audio match of something doesn't necessarily mean it happened. I do think with some of that stuff, it's funny. This is like tangentially related, but there are people who are talking about their kids as early as like 6, 7, and 8 having election trauma or like hating Trump so much they cry, or Kamala, depending on which part of the country you're from. And there's a part of me that's like, yeah, those kids ain't need to be knowing about that shit yet. Like, like that feels like early exposure. But I do think, yeah, like trust your gut and not everything you're going to hear from everybody is going to be the truth all the time. I mean, I distinctly remember when my daughter was like, a friend from school touched an emperor scorpion. He told me. And emperor scorpions are 7 inches long and they only live in like this remote Saharan desert. Like this kid he had never come into contact with an emperor scorpion. And I was just like, I think he's probably pulling your leg, baby. And she's like, no, he's my friend. And he told me seriously. And we kind of went through this exercise of like, well, next time we have them over, why don't you ask his dad? Like this exercise of like, how do you investigate a claim that seems kind of like fishy?
I think that's important. Also, empathy is probably the wrong word, but also thinking through why someone would be thinking a certain thing. So, you know, if and when your kids are ready to learn about politics, like not just being so one-sided. It's like, I think, a good debate technique. Understand how someone might believe the other side, whichever side you're on, as opposed to indoctrinating them with dogma of like, this is how we do it over here.
Yeah.
That's probably the truest way to get someone to believe something else, is just show them the facts, and then show them the facts why the other side believes that, and that why maybe the other side might be doing something else. Like if you don't know the why behind it, it's going to be really hard. Like something I've started to do with our older kids is anytime I get a robocall, I'll put it on speaker and we'll just like listen to it. Cause it's like, they're very convincing.
Yeah.
It sounds like, it could be AI. I don't know what it is, but they know how to pause and wait for you to respond.
Yeah.
And if you ask like, is this a robot? They have like a good trained response to that. But you can kind of tell with the uncanny valley, but that uncanny valley is going to go away.
Yeah. It'll get better and better.
So it's like, I'll put it on speaker and then it'll just spark a conversation about like, yeah, why do you think they did that? Yeah, they're trying to get money. And then they'll be, but why would they do that to trick somebody? It's like,
I do often, particularly with younger kids. I mean, I think as kids get older and older, you probably expose them more to the realities of like the kind of misleading stuff that's out there. I a lot of times think of it like really in terms of like, what are the soft skills that you can get in there really early? And annoyingly, probably one of the answers, and you spoke to it earlier with like kind of sometimes trying out something with your kids that's not true is like a game, is like they shouldn't just take your word for fucking everything either.
right.
Like just because an authority figure says something doesn't mean it is so. I remember a conversation when we were kind of breaking a rule, but it was a stupid rule. And my daughter was like, but that's a rule. And I was like, rules are made by people too. It is kind of instilling this, like, trust your own judgment about things, because not everybody is going to have your best interests in mind all the time.
Yeah. I think also just like then going deeper into the why.
Yeah.
Well, why do they have this rule? Or why is this person trying to scam us? Like if I get a scammy email and they'll be like, oh, you got an email. I'm like, don't click that. And they're like, why? And I'm like, well, let's take a look.
Yeah.
We won't click on it, but I'll be like, why do you think that, they're trying to get money? And maybe they're not bad people. Maybe they're just in a different part of the country. And I mean, they are bad people.
There was a really interesting, I can't remember what, it was a podcast, but this guy was getting repeated attempt for like an antivirus thing that was trying to scam him. And he was a computer scientist and he tracked down the people who were doing them. And it was this elaborate, it was an amazing podcast episode. He like figured out who they were and started sending them pictures of themselves at work. And like, they were fucking freaking out. But eventually he like formed a relationship with the guy that tried to scam him. Cause he was like, I know who you are. I know what you were trying to do. And the guy was basically, he lived in a poor area of India. And he was basically like, you Americans are so rich. You have so much. And it was like, it was a fascinating why, right? He just had this perception that people in the States, not totally wrong, because this guy wasn't like, look, I don't have all the money in the world. And the guy's like, do you have 10 pairs of pants? Because I got one.
Right. And that's like the scam. What about legal aggressive sales tactics, where people try to tell you that, well, your windows are really dirty. And we know internally that we just got our windows cleaned like 2 weeks ago. Yeah. And these people are coming by like, oh, I see some stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then, just have that conversation with the older kids. Like, hey, you see why? Because there's also just a level of gullibility that we need to, I don't know, train the kids on, because people can be very susceptible to good sales techniques and if you're not your own arbiter of what you need to be doing in life, you can lose a lot of money real quick in non-nefarious ways. This episode is brought to you by Violet Archer in the Case of the Purple Martin. It's a chapter book with illustrations on every page. You can read it to them if they're 5, 6-year-olds, but then as soon as they can read, up till 12, 13, it's an insanely good book with plot twists like worthy of an adult's attention. I love this thing. I'm so proud of Matt and Milkless of putting this thing out. So if you want to support Milkless and get an awesome book for your kids, it'd mean a whole lot to us if you bought it. Check the podcast description for the link to Amazon and buy it today. And if you already have it,
You can pop back into Amazon and give us an honest review. Thanks.
I read this interesting book, and there was this guy that was studying why large groups of people could believe untrue things. And for much of the book, he's like studying this, trying to answer it. And then the conclusion that he reached in the end is like, it's actually not that complicated. It's just other people. Mm-hmm. Like large groups of people will believe untrue things because other people believe them, or at least seem to believe them. And what he ends up becoming interested in is like, actually what's more interesting is like, how do small groups of people not believe mass delusions? Which is kind of another fascinating question, which is, I guess what I'm getting at is like, how do you train people? Hey, how do you train kids to not be credulous or overly gullible, particularly without like making them untrusting of the world? Mm-hmm. But I do think, I mean, like, I'm probably influenced by a recent guest we had on whose episode will not air for a while, but we were talking about play. Probably play is a good way to do this. I mean, ultimately, like what that researcher, Evan, I've always loved Evan. I don't always remember his last name.
Dr. Evan Orticio. Oh, he's not a doctor yet. I forgot.
Pending Dr. Evan Orticio.
Mr. Evan Orticio.
He's one of, if not my favorite pending doctor.
Yeah.
But like, that's a game. Like basically he created a game. Mm-hmm. So it does seem like the way to explore this with kids. One, yeah. I mean, I think you're like, if your kids are old enough to have like an email address and they have a scam email, yeah, open that up, look at it for sure. But I think there's also just ways to build this like internal barometer of like, does this pass the gut test? How much do I trust my gut? Like that kind of stuff that's going to just kind of be like the more foundational, protection against that kind of bullshit.
Yeah. And like when friends say stuff about the scorpion, we've had conversation where it's like, yeah, well, let's look it up. Let's look it up in the encyclopedia, or let's go on the computer together. Okay, cool. Those are in Africa. All right. Do you think your friend has traveled to Africa? Maybe. Okay. Maybe. So that's a question. And then you go through, why do you think they might have said that? And then thinking through, okay, to be braggy or something, someone was talking about something scary they did.
Yeah.
So they wanted to add something on top. It just, I think kind of like understanding the underlayer, I think is important.
Yeah. There's another interesting, we got to interview for this documentary series we were trying to pitch, this woman who combats misinformation. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple of interesting things that she said. One is like, generally speaking, misinformation frequently, especially on the internet, travels faster than good information and more effectively. Like, mm-hmm. I can't remember that she gave us some wild stat that like COVID misinformation accounted for like 10% of all posts and like 85% of traffic. Mm-hmm. So it's like, oh, the misinformation is doing better than the good information. And basically what she said is like, yeah, the misinformation felt better to believe. It was simpler, made the person protagonist. It gave him a villain instead of like chance. And so I do think that like, that's maybe another very foundational skill is like don't believe things because they feel good to believe. Believe things because you have investigated them and found them to be true.
Totally. And I think also just like going through that process where if they hear something about the scorpion or some other factoid that a friend said that maybe just got it twisted up, like had one of those books like 1,000 Crazy Things You'll Never Believe. And then it got twisted a little bit.
Yeah.
And then it's like, there's, that at one point there was 700 billion people on Earth. And it's like, well, let's, instead of just being like, that's not true. It's like, let's look this up. Or maybe it's a more common claim. There's Snopes or factcheck.org. And just like, even if the kids are too young to do it, just seeing you go through that fact checking process. Mm-hmm. Hey, that's interesting. Sounds cool. Like, let's see. I don't know about that. I don't know about that one, but
yeah,
let's go check it out. Let's go check it out on the internet, and then dad or mom goes and does some fact checking.
I like that a lot of like, and particularly if you can like involve them in the process of like, how would we investigate that?
Yeah.
Like that seems fishy. How would we, which is what my daughter did when she was like, get on FaceTime with your brother. Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question at the same time because this doesn't seem, I mean, I think that's one thing that is interesting to pull from that study is like, yeah, your job when you like see something that is dubious, whether it's like a scam email or, a piece of news that seems like bullshit or whatever, your job is not to just like shut that down and be like, that shit's not true. Cause all that's training them to do is to trust you unquestioningly.
Right. Which means they will probably trust all their teachers, trust their bosses.
Yeah.
Trust.
Yeah.
And people are inherently flawed. Can be.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe like trust authority, in general, kind of blindly, which, has its own set of problems. But yeah, like taking them through the process of that helps them exercise, and making it, kind of an investigation makes it kind of fun too.
Yeah. This is tangentially related, but another thing that I think I'm going to start doing, I've only done it a couple times, but when your kids ask you how many leaves are there on Earth? Mm-hmm. Usually one of two things happen. I guess a number, probably like, it's 3 trillion. And then, or I say like, that's not an effective question to ask. I don't want to play this right now, but really the thing is, it's, if you've ever, I don't know if you have, cause you're an artist, but I went to a consultancy interview out of college, did not get the job.
Their loss.
But, all the consultancy, interviews are like, how many oranges can fit in a tractor trailer? And it's not about getting it right. It's about
how you think.
Well, roughly tractor trailers, 15 feet by 100 feet. And even if you're wrong on those, they just want to see your thought process. Okay, 15 times 100, 1,500. How many oranges can fit in a square, 1 foot by 1 foot, blah, blah, blah. You just kind of walk them through that. That's probably a way more effective way to do the tree thing or the leaves thing.
Yeah. There are trillions of trees. I was
it's a lot.
surprised by this. There's so many trees.
Which is why global warming is fake. Anyways, what I said a false statement because I wanted to be fact checked, and then you left it out there dead air that now I'm on the record as saying global warming is fake. So
you do think that. I mean, you're always walking around saying that, like how it's a Chinese hoax, which I think is to me that's an uncomfortable stance for you to hold. Like,
I'm a quarter Chinese, so I take offense to that.
We're such good friends that I've kind of always let it go, but like, I'm not comfortable with you continuing. I mean, you push that in person all the time, but you saying it on air, I don't know, dude.
Well, yeah. Anyway, I fact check it.
Fact check it. Yeah. Get in there.
It's legit. It's the real deal.
Well, yeah. I mean, I do think that susceptibility to false information is something that, like, all people, regardless of where you fall politically, because the environment has become so polarized and has become so much about teams, I do think grownups in general are more susceptible to it than they used to be, particularly about politics, because there's this confirmation bias thing that if you hear something shitty about the other side, it feels good to hate them the way you do. And so you end up just not thinking critically or investigating the claim. You just believe it because it feels good to believe.
Right.
So yeah, I think training your kids in the art of, when they hear something, deciding for themselves. It's funny. It's like, we did that episode when we both were turning 40 about like what things do we like about aging and getting older. Aging is maybe overstating the case. We're not aging.
Yeah, no.
But about
I'm Benjamin Buttoning.
Yeah, hell yeah.
My internal age.
But one thing that I have found that I like about it is that it is increasingly important to me, and more so I feel that the opinions and beliefs that I have about things are mine. I'm not just saying something because I heard it somewhere. Mm-hmm. That's like really important to me, because I feel like you just see people going around like that, and it's like, oh, where'd you pick that up?
Here's what you should do.
Which Instagram reel was that in?
Yeah.
And I just don't want to be that way. Like, I want to hold the beliefs I hold for a reason. Would like to train your kids to do that too.
Yeah, because if you don't go down to the why and understand why people are needing you to get this extended warranty,
yeah,
there's a lot of dogma.
Yeah.
Like, well, in this family, we never get the rust coating and extended warranty on the car.
Yeah.
Just because. And then it's like, well, my dad said we don't do this. I feel like you're doing your kids a disservice. It's good to go into that why. It also gives you something to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do they do this? Well, like I've explained insurance. There's good insurance, And
Yeah.
then there's frivolous insurance.
Yeah.
That you don't need. Well, why would they sell it to you if you don't need it?
Yeah.
And that's another great conversation to have. Well,
Yeah.
they're trying to make more money per customer.
How often is that why is somebody being shitty when you get to the bottom of it? Money. My favorite blackjack dealer I ever had in Vegas, he was showing an ace and he offered everybody insurance.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, is that insurance? Is that a good idea? And he put down his card deck and he like swept his hands over the casino. He says, nothing here is a good idea. Or we wouldn't offer it. And then he took me through the math of it. And I was like, oh, fucking A. He's like, yeah, that hits blackjack this many times out of 10. Like it's 1 to 2 versus 1.12 to 2. And so like, yeah. And it was just like, it was a funny moment of like, that probably would be a good way to talk to a kid,
Yeah.
Like, let me explain to you why. No, this is not a good idea.
Cool.
Well, cool study, man. I dig it.
No, 100%. I mean, we're not in the social media phase yet for our kids. And I know there's a great movement that's like wait till 8th, where kids, are not really on phones till 8th grade. But then even then, it's like, how do you open up Pandora's box of social media?
Yeah.
Because I think, you don't want to unleash a kid unfettered when they're 18 into the social media world and not know how to do it. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day. But,
hopefully for a day far from today.
Yeah. I've shown our 8-year-old some like funny videos on TikTok or Instagram Reels.
Sure. Yeah.
And sometimes they're funny because it's fake,
Mm-hmm.
or like they're interesting because it's AI.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's already starting a little bit like, is that real?
Yeah.
I'm like, no. So that's not real, but isn't that cool and funny? That is the zebra, red, blue experiment. Just saying that like this thing that sometimes has America's Funniest Home Videos, true pranks. Other times it's not real.
Cool. I like your study. Good luck. Best of luck to you, Evan Ornitholio. Orticio.
Orticio. Evan Orticio.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Brought to you by Violet Archer in the case of the Purple Martin.